The room was too quiet for comfort. Even the hum of the overhead lights felt loud, unnatural. The air, heavy with anticipation, carried the sharp scent of wood polish and freshly brewed coffee that no one had touched. Rows of journalists sat, like coiled springs, fingers twitching near keyboards. Cameras rolled silently. It was the kind of silence that hangs before a storm before a truth is dropped like a hammer. Then, the smirk came. Governor Gavin Newsom, tall and polished, in his tailored navy suit and that trademark gleam in his eye, leaned back in his chair just enough to send a ripple of arrogance through the room. He crossed his arms, smiled, smirked, and locked eyes with the man sitting across from him. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. didn't blink. His face, weathered by decades of battles fought in courtrooms and on podiums, remained unreadable. He'd asked the question just seconds ago, 12, to be exact. 12 seconds ago, he'd launched a question that felt like a blade, direct, unforgiving, and honed by truth. And then Gavin looked down. It all began months earlier, before the cameras, before the questions, before the world began to notice. The cracks. Gavin Newsom was riding high. He was California's golden boy, ambitious, sharp idiocy. He had the jawline of a movie star and the confidence of a man who believed destiny had already saved him a seat in the White House. But beneath the polished image lay a truth far more complicated. Gavin grew up amid wealth and expectations. Born into a world where success was assumed, but affection was rationed. He learned early that charm opened doors, that charisma was currency. And so he built a version of himself that never wavered, never stumbled publicly, at least. But it was tiring. Privately, he battled doubt. Nights stretched long with whiskey and questions he never voiced. Is this me? Or just who they want me to be? Robert Kennedy Jr., on the other hand, was forged by loss. The ghosts of his father and uncle trailed him like shadows. He grew up surrounded by legendsmen who moved mountains but also bled and fell. For years, Robert fought to be more than a legacy. He became a lawyer, an environmental crusader, a voice for inconvenient truths. His speech was strained, a product of spasmodic dysphonia. But his convictions rang clear. He didn't court favor. He pursued justice, even when it cost him allies. Their paths collided one fall morning in D.C., at a public town hall intended to showcase bipartisanship, but behind the scenes, the stakes were high. Rumors had swirled for weeks, a series of whistleblower documents hinting at gross mismanagement in California's mental health funding initiative, an initiative Newsom had championed. The documents had somehow found their way to Kennedy's team, and Kennedy, never one to flinch from confrontation, brought them with him. The auditorium was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Vaulted ceilings, soft grey walls, and banners proclaiming voices of the future. Outside, protesters lined the streets, some cheering, others angry. Inside, the crowd buzzed. Newsom arrived with his usual entourage, his smile disarming, his handshake firm. Kennedy arrived alone. They sat across from each other on a modest stage, framed by American flags and a backdrop that read, "Restoring Trust." For nearly an hour, the exchange was polite, predictable even. Policy debates, safe anecdotes, a laugh here, a nod there. But then, Kennedy leaned forward. "Governor," he said, voice low but clear. "Would you like to tell this audience how $23 million, earmarked for mental health services in California, ended up in administrative overhead and no-bid contracts connected to your donors?" A collective gasp swept the room. Newsom blinked, smiled and smirked. The pause was sharp. His eyes sparkled, as if to say, "Really? This old trick?" He leaned back, crossed his arms, and gave the room a quick look, as if to gather agreement. But none came. The room had frozen. That smirk lasted exactly 12 seconds. Because Kennedy, slow and steady, reached into a worn leather folder and pulled out a photograph, an old one. A teenage girl, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a stained blanket, sitting outside a shuttered mental health clinic in Fresno. Next to her, a clipboard showing the date the facility closed, 2 weeks after the grant funding was reallocated. "Dead now," Kennedy said. "Fentanyl, Overdose, 18. She never got the help she was promised. Newsom's smirk faltered. And this, Kennedy continued, placing a typed email beside the photo, is from your deputy's assistant, approving a last-minute contract for a media firm owned by one of your top campaign bundlers. Same week, the clinic closed. Newsom didn't answer. His gaze dropped. First to the table, then to the floor. The silence was deafening. That moment didn't end the world, but it cracked something wide open. For Newsom, it marked the start of a reckoning. Not just politically, but personally. In the days that followed, the media storm was relentless. He denied impropriety, called the claims politically motivated, but internally, something shifted. He stopped drinking at night, stopped sleeping well. In his private residence in Sacramento, he began reading the audit reports himself, one page at a time. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did that girl's face. He reached out to Kennedy. Not for a rebuttal, for a meeting. A quiet one, no cameras, no teams, just two men in a room. Kennedy agreed. That meeting didn't start easily. Words came slowly. Accusations still hung in the air. But then Gavin said something neither expected. I didn't know. Kennedy narrowed his eyes. You should have. I do now, Gavin replied. From that point, the tone changed. Kennedy, to his surprise, saw something he didn't expect. Remorse. And Gavin, to his own discomfort, felt something new: shame. Yes, but also a flicker of resolve. And so a strange alliance formed. Gavin began pushing for reforms, real ones. Quietly at first. Removing corrupt officials. Revising funding structures. Visiting clinics, not with cameras, but with notebooks. Listening. Meanwhile, Kennedy used his network to amplify the issue. Not to shame, but to build momentum for systemic change. He introduced Gavin to activists and frontline workers. They didn't like the governor, but they liked what he was beginning to do. There were battles. Political ones. Legal ones. Personal ones. Newsom lost donors. Kennedy lost patients more than once. But they kept going. And through it all, something deeper unfolded. Newsom, the polished politician, started letting the masks slip. He spoke less in sound bites, started showing the cracks. At one town hall, when asked about leadership, he paused, looked at the crowd, and admitted, I used to think leadership was about appearances, about looking like you have answers. But I was wrong. It's about accountability even when it breaks you. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, they applauded. Kennedy, too, softened. His decades of fighting had made him a cynic. But working with someone willing to change Evan reluctantly rekindled something. He began speaking of redemption, of possibility, of grace. The final turning point came a year later, when a new statewide mental health initiative by a bipartisan team passed with overwhelming support. The bill was named the Sierra Act, after the girl in the photo. At the signing ceremony, both men stood side by side. No suits, no speeches. Just pens in hand and a shared understanding that neither would be the same again. The moment Kennedy asked that question, the moment the smirk dropped and Newsom stared at the floor, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about awakening. We all have them. Moments that break our illusions, that force us to look not at how we want to be seen, but who we've actually become. For Newsom, that 12-second journey from arrogance to awareness was just the beginning. For Kennedy, it was proof that even the powerful can change if you ask the right question. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder, truth doesn't shout. It waits, it watches, and then, in the silence after the smirk, it speaks.